St. Andrews has brought me nearer to Jesus and continues to in new ways every day.
We are invited into following Jesus on the way of life.
I feel like I'm at home when I'm here, and my relationship with the Lord has just begun. I didn't have one until I came here, and I'm so thankful.
I really see the heart of Jesus in this community, and it's just like one beautiful, multi-generational family.
That's what the entire Bible is about. Receiving the goodness of God and His mercy and grace and forgiveness, and that being the catalyst and the power to step on the journey of following Him, following Jesus.
God put that in us, a natural desire to serve Him, serve others, and that's what we're doing here.
You may remember that prior to coming to St. Andrews, I was a seminary professor, but prior to that, a long time ago, I was a student in seminary, and I remember one of my very first classes, as I went to go to school to learn how to be in ministry, one of my professors said, "Okay, students, what is the point of the Christian faith?" And he asked people to raise their hand and answer, and then he said, well, some of you are saying, is it to sing together? You call that worship. Okay, so we sing and worship together. Is it about preaching? Is it about being with friends? We use churchy words like fellowship. Is that really what it means to be the church? And what he ended up saying to us in this very first class, I don't even remember what the class was, but it really struck me. He said, the church is about one thing. His answer is about Jesus. Don't ever forget that the church exists for one purpose, and that is to receive Jesus, to hear from Him, to respond to Him, to follow Him, to know Him. The church is about this one who has come to rescue us and to restore all things that have been broken. Boy, ever since that time, and even before that time, it has so deeply resonated with my soul that the church is about Jesus. We are already in the season, what we call Lent. If you were here for the Ash Wednesday service last week, you probably got some ashes on your forehead, which goes back to Genesis chapter 3. You are from the dust. You have come from the dust, and to the dust you will return. And so what Ash Wednesday is about, the beginning of this period of 40 days, these 40 days where Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, and 40 days where Moses was with God as he received the Ten Commandments. And throughout the Old Testament, there's other times of this special period of 40 days. So Lent, which actually comes from an ancient English word for springtime, is not really about the time of year or the season. It is about the opportunity to prepare ourselves for the journey to Jerusalem with Jesus, to join Him as He moves through the villages, across creeks, through the woods, and ultimately to that great city, that grand city, Jerusalem, where He would suffer and die on our behalf, and ultimately to raise from the dead. Lent is this opportunity for us to slow ourselves down, to pay much more attention, and to truly see Him. And that's what we're doing in this Lent series. So the text we have is a great one to prepare us for Lent. In the encounter between a man named Bartimaeus and Jesus, right as Jesus is kind of finishing this journey to go to Jerusalem for those final days of His earthly life. So we're reading from Mark chapter 10, starting at verse 46. If you have a Bible, you may want to keep it open because we're going to look at some of these verses and what they mean for us for Lent as we read this. Mark chapter 10, verse 46. Then Jesus and His disciples came to Jericho. As Jesus and His friends, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, Call him. So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Oh, teacher, Rabbi, I want to see." Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight, and he followed Jesus along the road. This, friends, is the word of the Lord. And so therefore we respond with thanks be to God. Indeed, what I would like you to see in terms of what occurred between Jesus and Bartimaeus, what happened inside of this blind beggar that is recorded here in the Gospel of Mark that can help us to begin to get ourselves ready and to participate in this Lenten season of joining Jesus on the road. First, he was realistic and honest about his condition. Verse 46, we see they came to Jericho as Jesus' disciples, together a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. What we see with Bartimaeus is that he had this certain condition. He had this life experience. He had this way of living that he was using to do the best he could to respond with the cards he had been dealt. We don't have any idea how he became blind, how long he had been blind, but we do know that this man was blind, sitting in his usual spot outside the city gate, begging. He was doing all he could with the circumstances he had. And so as he was doing all he could, he was being realistic, knowing I've got no choice but to be a beggar. This is who I am. I am a man who has a place by the road, asking people to help me because I have no other choice. I am really struggling, but I'm doing all that I can. And yet he also knew, and we see this later, that he was longing for some way to be lifted out of his circumstances. And in this case, the physical act of healing his blindness. That's the first thing about him. He was honest about his situation and doing the best he could. Now, even in the midst of that, when Jesus came along, that's the next verse, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth walking in front of him, when he heard from the crowd, and I've actually talked about this text 2 different times here at St. Andrews, where Bartimaeus shows us a lot about his faith, but now I want to talk more about the process of moving to the point of seeing for Bartimaeus. And second thing, he decided to not just let Jesus walk by. He decided to act. The time was now. The place was here. In other words, I'm in this circumstance. I know my circumstance. I'm doing the best I can, but Jesus has come, which throws a wrench in that equation. Now is the time to act. And so he screams out, "Jesus, have pity, have mercy on me." That's the second thing. So then, as he's screaming out, what does the people around him say? And that leads us to the third thing. He was battered with advice. He had people around him telling him to stay quiet, to stay in his place, to remain in his condition. As Jesus comes by, it was not his place to scream out, to interrupt the procession, to make everybody uncomfortable around him. He had all this advice. He had people kind of hammering him from all sides. The voices were yelling for him. And even then, even as he screams out to Jesus, "Have mercy on me," he hears the voices tell him, "No, you're wrong. Stay put. Don't rock the boat." Fourthly, and this is a passage, this is the point that I have talked a lot about here at St. Andrews, 2 specifically different times. When Jesus finally stopped and said, "Call him here," they finally called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Verse 50, throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. Now, I've pointed out in these other 2 sermons, maybe you remember, that when he threw the cloak, he threw with abandonment, he threw with faith. He cast his old life aside. He wasn't planning on coming back to his cloak, the one thing that he held on to for security, perhaps his most valuable possession. See, what Bartimaeus did when he went through this progression, first, realistic and honest about his situation, then decides to act when Jesus was right before him, getting hammered with all kind of voices and advice, but ignoring that, and ultimately throwing his old life to the wind as he cast off his cloak. That leads to the fifth thing. Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" What do you want me to do for you? Now, you can read this and you can hear this and say that Jesus meant, he knew he needed to see, he was blind, but he put it back on Bartimaeus. So Bartimaeus had to make a decision of what he truly wanted from Jesus. And as we read the rest of this passage, if you go in the last couple of verses of this, on the surface we may see it's obvious he simply wanted his physical sight. But we're going to see that Bartimaeus wanted more than physical sight. He wanted to see more deeply. He wanted to have his life turned upside down. Jesus had come, and he not only wanted to be healed of sight, but he also wanted to discover life. And so he said to Jesus, he made his decision, "I want to see." And then Jesus says these beautiful things. "Go, your trust, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight. And notice that he followed Jesus along the road. If he only wanted sight, it really wasn't about Jesus. It was about his own needs, his own circumstances. The progression that we see with Bartimaeus was this progression from an honest recognition and awareness of his own circumstances and his own need, ultimately Jesus coming in front of him and him going through the process of finding himself in front of Jesus, where Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" Oh, I want to see. This Lenten series that we're focusing on during this whole time leading up to Easter Sunday is a time for us to be able to go through that same progression that Bartimaeus did. We're going to be doing morning moments that are all focused, going through the process of movement from our current circumstances, our current understanding of faith, the things that hold us back, the things that we complain about, the things we're not sure of, the things we're afraid of, the things that make us mad, the insecurities we carry, the pain that we experience. All of these things, they come into play as we enter into Lent. That's the gift of the Lenten season, that for 1,500 years, followers of Jesus have set aside 40 days besides Easter, besides Sundays, to be able to say, "I need to take a deeper look. I need to ask harder questions. As I prepare myself for the road to the cross, I want to see." And to see means the same things it did for Bartimaeus. Notice the first thing. He was honest about his circumstance. He was realistic. He was doing all he could. I'm sure that all of us are doing the very best we can to figure out how we deal with the heartaches we have, some of the wins that we have, the complexity of our relationships, the journey we've been on and where we hope to be going. All that comes with that. To actually begin the process of seeing Jesus Christ as he truly is means we've got to see ourselves for who we truly are. We need to allow ourselves to be true, realistic, and honest about our circumstances and about how we cope with our circumstances. That's what Lent will do for us if we give it a chance. To see Jesus means we need to believe and know that we need Jesus desperately. That's what Bartimaeus, that was the fix he was in. And that's the first thing. Secondly, Lent gives us the opportunity to decide that we are going to do something about our life as Jesus walks in front of us. Bartimaeus could have kept his mouth shut and nothing would have changed in his life. He would have been able to tell every friend he ever had and every person that put money in his little coin thing. He could have said, hey, I was there that day in Jericho. I was right there. Jesus was right in front of me. And I got to see him. I could feel the dust coming off the end of his sandals as he walked by me. Bartimaeus could have celebrated the fact that he was sort of close to Jesus for a season. But he knew that would never change anything in his life. See, what's great about Lent is we get this opportunity as we're truly honest with our own sense of self and our own circumstances and what we rely on, what angers us, what excites us. We have the opportunity, the beautiful opportunity to be able to step in and make a decision that we have Jesus right before us. And during this Lent season, we can act so that he will help us to see him, to see life, to see the new life that he has for us and the journey he's taken us on. That's the second thing. Third, Bartimaeus, when he shouted out, the crowds were letting him have it. He had all kind of advice. You know, there's something called groupthink. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but it's interesting, especially with things we get kind of riled up about. We may talk to friends. We may be on email or watch some kind of news thing or listen to a blog. And what ends up happening is we can get wrapped up with a reaffirmation of all the things that would keep us from truly seeing ourselves as we are and from seeking to act that Jesus is right in front of us. The voices can keep us from actually knowing him and seeing him. It is very easy for any of us as followers of Jesus to get kind of locked down and locked into that the reinforcement of my own attempt to make sense of life has voices that cause me to hunker down even more. See, Lent blows that away. It's a time where we can shut off the voices and shut down their influence in our life, to not listen so much to what others say, especially if they reinforce us kind of staying stuck. But maybe that means that we do some things during Lent. Maybe that means as we shut off those voices and their influence on us as we seek to see Jesus, where believers for over 1,000 years fasted during this time. That can be from food, and there's one way to do that, by fasting on a regular basis from food, but fasting for a season or a day a week or whatever you do from email or from your phone or from news programs, from certain conversations that I prayerfully and in a disciplined way, I make sure that I'm hearing from the voice of the Spirit inside. To actually turn off the voices that would keep me from truly seeing Jesus is an essential aspect of Lent, because we can continue to get wrapped up in issues and voices that would keep us from him. That's the third thing. Fourthly, when Bartimaeus got up, remember he cast aside his cloak, he threw it into the crowd. Well, part of Lent is the willingness, if we're going to act. If Bartimaeus had shouted to Jesus, have mercy on me, have mercy on me, and then Jesus had called him here, but Bartimaeus didn't have the courage to actually throw his cloak, nothing would have changed in his life. When I don't have the courage to throw my cloak, I want to see you, Lord, but I love my cloak. It's a birthday present when I was 6. It's something that's really important to me. Lord, do you really want me to get up in the middle of the crowd? Yeah, they're yelling at me, but I got my nice little spot here. Do you truly want me to cast my old life aside, to turn my back on the pallet and the cloak and the little dish where I get coins? Do you want me? Jesus says, if you want to see me, you got to cast your old life aside. There's just no other option. To cast our old life aside is different for each one of us. And it may be something that you're not even aware of right now, but if you go through this several week period of Lent, perhaps the Lord will quicken something inside of you by his Spirit and say, you gotta cast that aside, because you'll never see me if you don't cast that away. Attitude, anger, behavior, patterns, whatever it is the Lord will bring to us. See, that's what Bartimaeus did. He went with abandon by throwing that aside. And finally got to Jesus, and Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? And that's the fifth thing. That's the question Jesus will always ask. And Lent is the beautiful opportunity to take stock of what I truly want from him, what I truly believe I need from him, and not on my terms. See, when Bartimaeus came, he came raw from the inside out, having thrown his cloak, having been yelled at by the crowd. He comes to Jesus and he made his decision. He spilled everything inside of him. Oh, Rabbi, I want to see. But the beautiful gift of Lent is that Jesus has invited us to see him, to see ourselves, to be made new by the power of his Spirit, but only when we make that decision to tell him from the inside out, I want to know you, I want to follow you, I want to be yours, I want to see life as you see it. I don't want to see it as my friends tell me to see it, or as the news media reinforces, or what I've always believed. I want to be completely set free like a little kid. I want to see, Lord. That's why in this series we're going to ask the questions, what does it mean to really see him? And lastly, as Jesus said, you trusted me, and so therefore your trust has healed you. Then in verse 52, we read that Bartimaeus didn't go back to the cloak. He followed Jesus on the road. The goal of the Lent process and to see Jesus is to belong to him and follow him. Bartimaeus' vocation, his calling, changed from being a blind beggar on the side of the road to being a follower of Jesus, not having any idea what that would mean, but it didn't matter. To see Jesus will culminate in bringing together all of the longings of our heart, all of the dreams of our mind, every hope we've ever had come together as we see Jesus, and we are compelled, we can do no less than to follow him, to see. Several years ago, I was writing a book called From Father to Son, and I was reading a newspaper on a Saturday morning, and I was kind of tired, and my kids all knew that I was writing this book, but it was just a normal Saturday morning. I don't know what I was eating. And those are the days you actually had paper that was paper, as opposed to on your iPad or something. So I'm reading the newspaper, and I'm not that into it. I'm just reading the newspaper, but I have this weird way of when I focus on something, I don't hear anything else. So one of my sons was trying to get my attention, and I don't remember even him doing that, but I'm reading the paper, and evidently he said, Dad, hey, Dad, he's in the kitchen. I'm right there in a little breakfast nook, right next to him. Dad! And he's getting very frustrated. And finally, he comes and does something that was not really normal in our family. He comes and hits the paper out of my hand. Just whack! It startled me. I probably spilled coffee. And he goes, do you see me or not? You're writing a book on being a dad, and you don't even see me right next to you. You don't hear me. You don't care. And he's mad. And man, that was eye-opening. And yes, clearly, the object lesson was I was writing a book on being a dad, and I completely violated everything I was saying. Clearly, I have violated in many ways everything I really believe to be true, but I get in my own way. I stick to my own patterns. I should be able to read the paper when I want to, instead of really seeing, instead of hearing. I need help. And, Brandon's going to sing a song for us right now that's this beautiful song. It's been around a long time. You're Everything from David Crowder. I need Jesus to somehow teach me what does it mean to see him. to be able to throw my cloak, to be able to ignore the voices, to have a discipline, to shut out all those things that hold me back, and to come to him and see. Oh, maybe during this Lent season, you and I and all of us together truly see Jesus for his sake and his glory. Lord, help us to see you with fresh eyes and fresh hearts. You're everything to us, and you have the power to give us the courage and the strength to be able to see you. In your name, amen.